Hey, so it's me, Rachel, and I'm here to walk you through the module study protocol. For those of you who have been around for the last year or several years, I know that this is something that you have done both with me and independently. And for those of you who are new to Wit and Wisdom, you may have heard about this, you may not have. Either way, it's valuable. We're coming back in person for the first time, and we're gonna make the best of it because it's good for students and it's gonna be fine. We're gonna do great. So let me share my screen so that you can see what we are talking about. So this is the module study protocol that Wit and Wisdom has created to help teachers who are familiar and who are not familiar with Wit and Wisdom as they prepare to teach any of the modules that they've created. It is one of their preparation documents that is free through their website. I'll also make sure that you have links to it and access to it so that you can print it out if that is how you operate. So as you can see here, there are some pretty clear directions about what to do. I'm going to walk you through them briefly, and then you'll have time independently during, I assume, this first week of the teacher back to school stuff to work on completing this module study protocol independently. And I guess you'll hear from Ms. Miller or I about how we'll follow up with that so that it's not just a compliance piece, so that we're actually using it to, demonstrate its value and get some use out of it. This may look different for those of you who have only ever had a physical teacher edition or only had a virtual one. So the materials that you'll need to get in order to be able to do this module study protocol are listed here. You will need a teacher edition, ideally a student edition of the student facing materials for module 1. You'll need a copy of the core text, any of the supplementary texts that the unit calls for, and then however either you choose to complete this or the school leadership may have decided on some sort of other way to make it easier just to keep track of all of these things. So it may be up to you, it may be less up to you, there may be fewer options, but there will need to be some sort of way that you are actually interacting with this rather than just flipping through and glancing at things. Also, sticky notes, always great as an option. So the first thing to do is to look at your module title, your essential question, look at the summary, the student understandings, and the knowledge goals. I'm not sure where this video that you're watching now will come in sequence, but if you have already seen the standards tracking video, this is where you'll see within the module overview, the standards page, where the standards that are included in your standards tracker are the focus standards that Wit and Wisdom has selected for this module. If you haven't seen the standards tracker, this is the first time that you can see within that module overview what the standards are that are going to be the ones that are the most prioritized, not only for the purposes of the unit, but also for our tracking for this module, which standards those are. So one thing to answer, and again, I'm not sure what form this will take, but actually go through the process of thinking about it and responding to it. What key knowledge are students going to develop in this module? And this key knowledge is also referred to as the module's knowledge puzzle. And also think about how and where you're going to display this module title and essential question within your classroom. That guidance may be more explicitly shared from Ms. Miller at a later date, but thinking about your physical space within your room is a valuable thing to do during this pre-service time of year. Next, ideally, you would have read all of the student texts before you start to teach them. I know from being a teacher that that's not always the case, but take a copy home with you and just try and get through as much of the core text as you can before you start teaching it so that you're able to provide the context that students need, and so that you're able to really anticipate questions, answer questions, and so that you're not learning along with them about the content of what you're teaching, So another thing to consider, and those of you who use the Wit and Wisdom projected slides, this may already be kind of knit in, but thinking about your classroom space, are there any text covers or other images that are relevant to your module and the texts, the supplementary text as well, that you might want to display in your classroom? Also important, again, to read through those supplementary texts. I know that, for kindergarten and first grade, there seems like there's a million of them, but they also don't take that long to read. And it can be, good to practice reading through them so that when, you're reading them with or for students, you are familiar with what you're reading. So make sure to read through those ahead of time. And it's also really important, as it says, to think about how these texts contribute to the key understandings and all of the things that students are supposed to get from a unit, because they're called supplementary. That can sometimes feel like it means optional, but once you spend the time to read the core text or text in the supplementary ones, it can become a little bit more clear what part they play in the student understandings that they're supposed to be gaining, as well as their ability to be able to complete different activities and participate in different tasks effectively throughout the module. So reading those ahead of time, I realize, is an ask, but it's something that I think is really going to be beneficial to you as a teacher and also beneficial to your students. So to whatever extent that's possible, reading those supplementary texts ahead of time is going to be a really, really valuable thing to spend your time doing. That being said, sometimes there aren't sufficient copies of things. Sometimes, things are in virtual copy or physical copy, whatever. Thinking about how students are going to access those is important. It's also important to look at the focusing questions. Hopefully those of you who are new to the district and or new to Wit and Wisdom have already gotten some Wit and Wisdom training. It was unclear to Dr. Green and Ms. Miller what sort of training new hires would get about Wit and Wisdom, but as a refresher for those of you who are familiar, and newly for those of you who aren't, while there is like an essential question, like an overarching question for a module, within there are these little arcs that are based off of like smaller questions that help students get to the point where they can answer that greater question more fully. So looking at all of those focused questions within your module is really valuable so that you can see how each of those pieces and each of those arcs add up to students being able to perform successfully and demonstrate mastery and really get and be able to interact with all of the pieces of a unit so that they're getting a full understanding of the concepts and skills that they should be getting throughout a module. So one of the questions that you can be thinking about is, how is exploring each of these focusing questions going to help students answer the essential question? We are, I assume, in the next video or in an upcoming video for you guys, we are going to look more in depth at a focus question arc and how to plan for that. But just like really making a note of like how many focus question arcs are there, and how do each of those contribute to the essential question is a really valuable thing just to kind of frame your thinking as you're coming into a module. And also, if you're making a board either for the hallway or your classroom or, for some sort of digital space for families to interact with, you clearly want to have the essential question, but also like, how are you going to share with students or families or other stakeholders, like what each of these little focus questions are that are building towards students being able to answer the essential question in a full and robust way. So that's all under number 1, explore the module's content and ideas. Now we're going to get down to number 2, identify the module's learning goals. So again, we're going to look at those focus standards. If you've already seen the standard tracker, you already have a sense of what those are. If not, you'll see those for the first time. Look at those focus standards. Within the standards tracker, as it is at the time of recording on August 17th, I didn't include the language of the standard. That might be something that's valuable to put in, but even if it doesn't end up in the standards tracker itself, this is a really good time to actually write down, highlight, put on a sticky note, like what are the focus standards? And then what are the key phrases or words or things within that standard that really stand out and resonate, so that like you can make sure that like you have a full understanding of what those focus standards are and how they're going to kind of work together. Also, it's going to be important to look at the module learning goals for reading, writing, speaking, listening, and language. It's easy to forget about the speaking and listening and language, because we want to help our kids be able to read and write well. And there are other things that are knit into the Win Wisdom curriculum. So taking a look at those is really valuable. I would be remiss if I didn't state this, and I wish I'd done this earlier. If you have a physical copy of the teacher edition, it's really important, even if it says like highlight keywords or phrases. These are shared documents that are super expensive to replace, which is why we only have the limited number that we have. So instead of actually literally highlighting words or phrases, you are strongly encouraged, in fact, I would say required, to find like other ways to notate that, either through post-it notes or making a photocopy or something, because we want to keep these originals in as pristine condition as possible so they can be used for years to come. So a little bit of a sidebar, but just looking at the module learning goals for all the different types of learning that students do in your ELA classroom is going to be really important. Then moving on to the next, step 3, you want to look at the module's writing tasks and assessments. There's a whole assessment map at the beginning of the module that you can look at, but also, as I think we all know from whatever teaching program you went through to get to where you are today, it's always super valuable to look at the end product and think backwards, which is probably why this module study protocol is suggesting that you look at the student-facing EOM task even before you start teaching the module. So you can find that, through the Great Minds website. You can find it a whole bunch of different ways, but actually looking at the task, this is even suggesting to make a T-chart with 2 columns. Like what is the knowledge that students will need to get, what information, and then what skills will they need to obtain in order to be able to access that. This, can include standards if you want to look at the little post-its that you've put up of like the focus standards and you want to include those in your knowledge and skills T-chart, that's great. If you want to just kind of do it based on what you're seeing and thinking, that is also fine. I know that B is one of the things that I would have like rolled my eyes at, and I understand if you also roll your eyes, but this can be super helpful for a number of reasons. Actually completing the EOM task now as a student, kind of putting yourself in a student mindset and completing the EOM task is great because, it not only gives you maybe a model to show at some point, but also really gives you the experience of like, what texts do I need? What charts do I need to refer back to? What prior learning, what lesson, it really helps you think as a student and see what information you would need to have from the module up until the EOM to be able to complete it successfully. And I think it really helps put you in the student's shoes, even though you don't need to be, but it's a really helpful exercise. And, depending on what you learn about your students and their needs, it may be something that you can even refer back to as you are offering, help or guidance along the way, to have an example document of a successfully completed EOM task to share with them. But as we know, the EOM is not the only assessment. There are other major assessments. You can see that in the major assessments table within the module overview. You note any questions. And then I think this is the last one. Yeah. So the 4th and final step is to deepen your learning and your preparation. So there are other preparation protocols that Wit and Wisdom has created to help teachers really make sure that they're prepared, because this is a really well-researched and well-developed curriculum. And I can imagine that it would be very attractive to just be like, that I'm so excited I can come and I can just like teach this thing that's made and it's great. And it is great and it is well researched and it is, you know, rigorous but interesting. But it's really important that since it's already written for us, that we take the time to really understand like why it's written the way it is and like what all of the components are. Because I think like as all of the different complications of a school year add up, it's easy to get overwhelmed and to make decisions about how you teach your students and what you teach them that like maybe you would make a different choice if you had a greater understanding of kind of the design of the module and like which pieces fit into which thing, which is why we'll talk in the next video, I assume, about the focus question ARC study protocol. So I kind of walked you through step by step, but of course, like you can read this on your own and complete this module study protocol for module 1. I assume that when this is shared with you, the form that it is expected to be done in and also kind of a timeline will be shared. This may be something that we share in collaborative planning. Excuse me. It may be something that you just like kind of share with school leadership. I'm not entirely sure, but if you have any questions, if you want to talk through it, if you don't know how to access these materials, Miss Miller is probably the easiest person because I'm probably on leave, but like still checking my email. So please feel free to email me. Or if you have my number, feel free to text me and ask me questions because I could probably just like shoot you off a link to whatever you need. But yeah, I hope that you enjoy looking at your module. Even if you've done it before, like getting a fresh pair of eyes on it is always a great move. And I will look forward to talking to you soon.